fruits, milk, vegetables, and grains a day, then they know. So we'll walk about that. Then, of course, you get some carbohydrates in desserts, but the thing is, what else do you get in desserts? Fat, right. So if you're trying to work on somebody that's really a high 70 or 80% carbohydrate diet, they really can't have these because these are going to contribute fat calories. Okay, so now there's some candy that's pure carbohydrates, such as cotton candy. And then there's some candies like chocolate that are only half carbohydrate because of the fat content. Now, we have been using more and more sugar over the years, and the trend has continued. So, despite the fact that we tend to be using more and more artificial sweeteners, we're still using more and more sugars. Why is that?
Because kids want to rush.
Well, or all the above. People like sweet. Is there anybody here that does not like that flavor of sweet at all? Even mildly sweet? I mean, some people like nauseatingly sweet, like can eat tons of birthday cake frosting. Some people are just like a little sweet. But is anybody who doesn't? What happens when you're born? What do you drink? Milk. What's milk?
Sugar.
Sugar. So it is sweet, right? So it's not super, super sweet. Lactose is less sweet than sucrose, but the second you're born, you're given even formula or babies can't digest starch yet. So they have to be given either formula or breast milk, of course breast milk ideally. So they were already getting sugar, they were already getting something that they like in terms of watching. I remember, like, when you read these baby books, I don't know what the baby books say now, because, you know, my son's not baby anymore, he's 20, but when I read it, I'm trying to figure out what's the best way to feed them, they would say, oh, you know, give them vegetables before you give them fruit, because if you give them fruit first, they're going to like the sweet flavor. But my pediatrician said that was ridiculous because they already like sweet flavor because of breast milk. And so, anyway, I don't know. It's very hard to do any kind of scientific research on babies' preference because they can't really communicate their feelings.
How was that?
I don't know, but anyway. So dietary goal for most people, 55 to 60%. But only 10% coming from simple sugar. So this is a simple sugar. All your sports drinks would be considered simple sugars. Simple sugars also, although your fruit juices, simple sugars are also, obviously, your sodas, your sweet tea. And so really, the average American, even including athletes, are getting probably more simple sugars than they need. Now, if you're working with an athlete, and that's the only way that they'll get their carbohydrate, from a performance standpoint, it's better that they do the simple sugars than not do the carbohydrate at all. From a health standpoint, we want to try and get them to eat more, you know, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, etc. So that comes out. So even for a non-athlete, the average American should be getting at least 300 grams. So you can see why that plate, you know, my plate is more carbohydrates. And then, of course, you know, fiber recommendations. Okay, so athletic recommendations, 55 to 60, but prolonged heavy exercise, 60 to 70. And we're going to talk about these here more as we go throughout the quarter. Okay, so how does what happens to the GI tract? Okay, first of all, almost everything is absorbed in the small intestine. So the majority of your anybody know how long that small intestine is if you were to stretch it out?
22
feet. 23 feet. Who said? Is that what you said? Yeah. So it's about 23 feet. And then in the small intestine they have all these villi, and on the villi they have these microvilli. Amazing ability to absorb. So the majority of all your nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine. So when I ask a test question and I say, where is carbohydrate absorbed? The answer is
small intestine.
Where is iron absorbed?
Small
Where does it go
intestine.
once it's absorbed? Liver.
Small intestine.
Where is fats absorbed?
Small intestine.
Yeah, there you go. Small intestine. Almost everything. With the exception of maybe some water and even alcohol. You may absorb a little in the stomach, but the majority of the alcohol is absorbed in the small intestine. And that's why the small intestine stuff, a lot of it is absorbed and goes to the liver via the portal vein. So, now, monosaccharides are absorbed, passive diffusion, what does that mean? Easily. So you don't need any energy. And active transport. Active transport means you need some energy. Okay, now, watch this. This is important from an athletic standpoint. Foods that have carbohydrate and sodium enhance water absorption. So, even if you did not need the carbohydrate calories because you were exercising less than 60 minutes, it still might have there might be some advantage to drinking an electrolyte sports drink because the sodium and the glucose can help enhance water absorption. In addition, some people prefer the taste of water, but other people prefer the sweet taste. And because they prefer the sweet taste, they will actually drink more fluid if you give it in the form of a Powerade or Gatorade or something like that. So they've done, so what happens? Carbohydrates leave the stomach very rapidly. Now starches start to be digested in the mouth. So when you chew a starch, you start the digestion in the mouth. It goes to the stomach, it's not digested in the stomach, and then it starts to be picks up digestion again in the small intestine. So things that might possibly impair performance. If it leads too fast, the stomach, which I said if it's too high in simple sugar, especially fructose, it leaves the stomach too fast, and that leads to something called a dumping syndrome. Okay, so what do you think we mean by dumping?
Dumps it into the
right, it dumps
small
it.
intestine.
Right, it dumps it. It leaves the stomach too fast. Dumps it into the small intestine. Goes through the small intestine too fast. Dumps it into the colon, and a symptom is diarrhea.
Diarrhea.
Does anybody know what diarrhea means from a medical terminology standpoint?
Oh, liquid.
Dia means complete. That's when you get a diagnosis, it's like supposed to, and rhea is discharge. It means like complete discharge. So if that's not rather graphic. So anyway, now, very important class, especially fructose. It's a reverse osmotic effect, draws water out of the body into the stool, which then leads to diarrhea. So this dumping syndrome can lead to dumping the stools out too fast, or a watery kind of diarrhea kind of stool. Well, you don't want that. Well, you don't want that. Period. But you especially don't want that if you're running a race. So, whereas from a health standpoint, a certain amount of juice and fruit would be beneficial, very beneficial, in fact, because juice you get a lot of antioxidants and those type of things. From a performance standpoint, you don't want to do a lot of juice on the day of performance. You don't want to drink juice during the exercise, and you don't want to do a lot of juice right before you compete. Now, it would be fine after, because the fructose from the fructose will go to the liver, be converted into glucose, which can be restored into glycogen. So if you want to do your afterwards, that's fine. But your fruit smoothie, probably you want to be careful not to have too many right before competition. Okay, so most is digested into glucose, and if not, then it's absorbed as other simple sugars, and they go converted to glucose in the liver. All right, now, what is a high glycemic index food? A high glycemic index food is a food that will be a carbohydrate food that is rapidly absorbed and processed into blood glucose. A low glycemic index carbohydrate food is digested slower, appears as blood glucose slowly. So if you had a high glycemic index food, same amount of carbohydrate, the glucose levels will peak fast. If you had a low glycemic index food, it might peak lower. So the same area, I don't know if you can see this blue, the same area under the curve, so the same total amount of carbohydrate that shows up as blood glucose, one's faster than the other. So if you have diabetes, what is it that you would like? It's probably better. Right, the lower glycemic index foods, because you don't want to stress the body. You're already having a difficult time dealing with glucose levels in the blood if you have diabetes. If you're an athlete and you're competing, what do you want during competition? You want the high glycemic index food because you want to get that carbohydrate. Because the whole purpose of taking carbohydrate while you're exercising is to try and deliver some of it to the muscle to spare what? To spare muscle glycogen. So it's entirely different, you know, what you use from a health standpoint, from an athlete standpoint. Okay, so this is showing the whole digestion. Not important. I don't know if you can read this from the back or not. The point here, and that this is from your book. The point that I want to show you is the small intestine is broken into 3 different sections, and you can see that from different parts of the intestine, different things are more likely to be absorbed. So there was a